My daughter said, "We need your house for the children." I sold the house and moved to another state without saying a word to her. When my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Mom, we need your house for the children," she didn't ask. She declared it. Like my life here. 40 years of mornings with chamomile tea on this very porch, 40 years of Christmas roasts and burnt pecan pies, was already concluded. I was 66, not buried. But in that moment, the way she folded her arms and tilted her head, I understood something cold and metallic. She wasn't planning around me. She was planning past me. She stood in my kitchen, sunlight cutting through the lace curtains, illuminating the dust above my old oak table. Tessa always did that thing with her jaw when she believed she was being reasonable. "It just makes sense," she continued. "The kids need stability, more space. You don't use half the rooms anyway." I looked at her carefully. I've learned something in 66 years. People reveal themselves in the spaces between their sentences. And in those spaces, I saw impatience. Calculation, ownership. "This is my house," I said quietly. "Of course it is," she replied too quickly. "But we're family." Family. That word felt heavier than my cast-iron skillet. She started walking through the house while we spoke, touching the banister, glancing into the dining room like she was appraising square footage. Brent, her husband, followed her in silence, hands in pockets, pretending not to inspect the walls. He paused near the hallway closet where I keep my paperwork. I noticed. "You've got 3 bedrooms upstairs," Tessa continued. "The kids could each have one. We could convert the den. You could stay in the downstairs guest room. It would be easier for you anyway. Less stairs. Easier for me. I still climb those stairs every night without holding the railing." I walked over to the stove and turned down the simmering pot of lentil stew. The smell of thyme and bay leaf filled the room. I needed that familiar scent to ground me, because something was shifting in my own kitchen, and I could feel it like a draft under a closed door. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. She exchanged a look with Brent. "A quick one. Practiced." "Just sign something simple," she said. "We'd transfer the house into our names. For legal reasons. It's just paperwork. You'd still live here." Just paperwork. At 66, I know the difference between paper and power. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached for the porcelain sugar bowl my late husband bought in Krakow during a business trip in 1989. It has a small crack along the rim. Imperfect, but still whole. I ran my thumb along that crack. Brent cleared his throat. "We're only thinking about the future." The future? Interesting how the future never seemed to include my voice. Tessa stepped closer. "Mom, you're not getting any younger." There it was. Not concern, not love, strategy. The house suddenly felt smaller, like the walls had leaned inward. I could see it now, the spare bedroom already mentally repainted, my study turned into a nursery, my cedar chest pushed into a corner somewhere because it didn't match. I looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. I remembered the night she had a fever at 7 years old, and I sat on the bathroom floor with her until dawn. I remembered sewing her Halloween costumes by hand because money was tight. I remembered skipping new shoes so she could go on that school trip, and now she was measuring my hallway with her eyes. "I'll think about it," I said. Her smile tightened. "We don't have a lot of time." That sentence told me everything. Because when someone says you don't have time, what they mean is, I've already decided. They stayed for dinner. Brent complimented the stew too loudly. Tessa talked about school districts and mortgage rates as if I had already agreed. The children ran upstairs without asking, slamming doors that weren't theirs. After they left, I walked through every room slowly. I touched the banister, the fireplace mantel, the old bookshelf that still smells faintly of lemon oil. I stood in the master bedroom doorway and felt something settle inside me. Not fear, clarity. If my daughter believed I was already fading, already confused, already preparing to hand over the keys, she was very wrong. Because at 66, I may move a little slower in the mornings, but I still know how to make decisions, and I was about to make one she would never see coming. Hello, my dear friends. I'm Grace. No one gets to erase you while you're still alive. If family plans your life without you, something's wrong. What would you do in Martha's place? Comment below. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, as I always do. Habit is a stubborn companion. I brewed my coffee in the old Italian mocha pot that whistles like it's complaining about the hour, and I sat by the kitchen window. The maple tree in the yard was shedding early leaves, and for the first time in years, I wondered what this house looked like to someone who didn't love it. To Tessa, it was square footage. To Brent, it was leverage. By noon, they were back. No call, no warning, just the sound of tires on gravel and car doors slamming with purpose. I didn't rush to greet them. Tessa walked in carrying a tape measure. Brent followed with a tablet in his hand. The children darted past me again, already claiming territory upstairs. We were in the neighborhood, she said, too brightly. You don't bring a tape measure when you're just in the neighborhood. Brent crouched near the entryway and began measuring the width of the hall. Just seeing if the sectional would fit, he muttered. The sectional? I asked. The one we'd bring, Tessa clarified, stepping into the living room and turning slowly in a full circle. This couch is a little dated. Dated. That couch held my husband's final nap before the hospital. I watched them move through my home like surveyors marking land for development. Brent snapped a photo of the staircase. Tessa opened the linen closet without asking. She even peeked into my study, the one room I keep locked when I leave. Mom, she called, why is this door locked? Because I locked it, I replied evenly. She laughed, but it wasn't amused. It was testing. At one point, I stepped into the hallway just in time to see Brent standing far too close to the small cabinet where I keep my documents. The drawer was slightly ajar. Looking for something? I asked. He straightened immediately. Just admiring the craftsmanship. That cabinet isn't craftsmanship. It's plain pine from a hardware store 20 years ago. They stayed for hours. Tessa began speaking as if arrangements were already confirmed. We'd repaint this room. Soft sage for Lily. Maybe navy for Ethan. Kids need personality. Kids need personality. Apparently, grandmothers need relocation. At one point, Tessa stood beside me at the kitchen island. You know this would actually take stress off you, she said quietly. Managing a property like this alone at your age. I turned slowly toward her. At my age? She sighed. Mom, don't be sensitive. Sensitive. That word hit differently than the others. It wasn't about space anymore. It was about competence, about rewriting the narrative. If I became sensitive, then I could become confused. And if I became confused, paperwork becomes easier. By late afternoon, they had mentally rearranged half the house. Brent even suggested knocking out part of the dining room wall to open up the layout. I pictured drywall dust floating over my late husband's framed war medals. No, I said sharply. They both froze. What? Tessa asked. No walls are being knocked down. She gave Brent a look, the kind couples share when they think someone is being irrational. The children came running downstairs, arguing over which upstairs bedroom had better light. Lily shouted, Mom said this one will be mine. Will be, not might, Not maybe. I felt something settle deeper inside me. Not panic, not anger, strategy. After they finally left, after Brent reminded me to think about the paperwork soon, I walked upstairs. The beds were rumpled. My quilt had been dragged halfway off. One of the closet doors stood open. It was subtle, but it was occupation. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out a notebook. I wrote down the date, the time they arrived, the tape measure, the photos, the comment about my age, the mention of paperwork, the children being told rooms would be theirs. I wrote everything. Then I opened my study, pulled out the small metal lockbox, and checked its contents. Deed, insurance, bank statements, copies of everything important. Still there. For now. I closed the box and locked it again, but this time I slipped the key into a different pocket. Because if my daughter thought she could slowly blur the lines of ownership, softly, politely, under the disguise of family, she was underestimating a 66-year-old woman who had survived childbirth, bankruptcy, grief, and a decade of caring for a dying husband. I may not move as fast as I once did, but I was about to move carefully, and carefully can be far more dangerous. 3 days later, the realtor appeared. She arrived in a beige sedan that looked too clean for coincidence. I was trimming the rosemary bush near the porch when she walked up the path with a folder tucked under her arm and a smile so polished it reflected the sun. "Mrs. Keene?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Sandra. I work with your daughter and son-in-law. They mentioned you might be considering options for the property." Options. That word again, elastic, vague, dangerous. I straightened slowly, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. "I'm not considering anything," I said. Her smile flickered, but didn't disappear. Professionals are trained for resistance. "Of course. I just thought it might be helpful to provide a valuation. The market is very favorable right now. Family transfers are quite common." Family transfers. As if homes were casseroles passed across a table. "I didn't invite you," I replied. She shifted her weight. "Tessa said you were open to a conversation." There it was, not even subtle. I held her gaze long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I said calmly, "My daughter speaks for herself, not for me." For a moment, the air between us felt thin. She hesitated, then nodded politely. "If you change your mind, my card is inside the folder." She extended it toward me. I didn't take it. After she left, I went inside and locked the door. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something colder. Awareness. Tessa hadn't asked if she could involve a realtor. She had assumed. That evening, she called. "Did Sandra stop by?" she asked casually. She did. And? And I told her I'm not selling. Silence stretched across the line. "Mom," she began, voice tightening, "why are you being difficult?" I almost laughed. Difficult. When did ownership become defiance? "I'm not being difficult," I said evenly. "I'm being clear." "You don't need this much space," she pressed. "It's impractical." I managed just fine. That's not what I mean. But it was exactly what she meant. There's a tone children use when they believe their parents are declining. It's subtle, softened, almost sympathetic. And if you're not careful, it can seep into your own thinking. I refuse to let it. "Tessa," I said, "this house is not a community project." She exhaled sharply. You're making this harder than it has to be. No, I was making it visible. After we hung up, I walked into the hallway and looked at the walls differently. I imagined strangers touring the rooms. I imagined Brent negotiating. I imagined papers signed in quiet offices while I was told it was for my own good. Then I imagined something else. Choice, not theirs. Mine. The next afternoon, they came again, this time without tools, without smiles. Tessa stood in the living room with her arms crossed. Brent leaned against the doorway like he owned the frame. "We need to talk seriously," she said. "I'm listening." She stepped closer. "You can't keep ignoring reality. At some point, you'll need help. Wouldn't it be better to handle this now while you're still capable?" Capable. There it was. Not whispered. Not implied. Placed directly on the table. I held her eyes. "Still capable of what?" She faltered, just slightly, but I saw it. "Managing things," she said. "Which things?" "The house, finances, decisions." Brent cleared his throat. "We're just thinking ahead." I walked to the cabinet and poured myself a glass of water. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of it filling the glass felt louder than usual. Then I turned around. "I am 66 years old," I said. "Not 96. I drive myself. I cook. I pay my bills. I climb my stairs. If you're concerned about my capabilities, perhaps you should examine your assumptions." Tessa's cheeks flushed. "We're trying to help you." "No," I said quietly. "You're trying to reposition me." That word landed. Reposition. Because that's what this was. Not concern. Not love. Logistics. For the first time since this started, I saw frustration crack her composure. "You're being paranoid," she snapped. Interesting. When a woman protects her autonomy, she becomes paranoid. When others circle her assets, they are practical. Brent stepped in. "No one is circling anything." But he didn't deny the paperwork. He didn't deny the realtor. He didn't deny measuring my hallway. They left abruptly that evening. No stew, no polite small talk. As their car disappeared down the road, I stood on the porch longer than necessary. The sky was turning that peculiar shade of lavender just before dusk. I inhaled slowly. Something had shifted. The mask had slipped. They were no longer pretending this was a gentle suggestion, and I was no longer pretending I didn't see the strategy. If they wanted to escalate, I would be ready. The isolation began so quietly, I almost admired the precision. That Saturday, I was supposed to go to my book club. We meet once a month, 6 women between 60 and 78, rotating houses, drinking strong coffee and arguing about novels like it's competitive sport. This month, it was my turn to host. At 10 in the morning, I called Tessa. She had promised earlier in the week to pick up the lemon tarts from a bakery downtown, the ones dusted with powdered sugar and just a hint of cardamom. She didn't answer. At 11, still nothing. At noon, my guests started arriving. No tarts, no Tessa, no explanation. I texted her. "Sorry, Mom. Totally forgot. Things are hectic." Forgot. She never forgets anything that benefits her. We managed without dessert. Clara brought biscotti. Naomi arrived with figs from her garden. But I noticed something else. 2 of them asked gently if I was doing all right. They said Tessa had mentioned I'd been a bit overwhelmed lately. Overwhelmed. I smiled. I'm perfectly fine. But the seed had been planted. Later that afternoon, I checked my voicemail. One message from a clinic confirming an appointment I had never scheduled. When I called back, the receptionist sounded confused. Your daughter booked a general cognitive assessment for you. Just routine. Routine. No one schedules a cognitive assessment for a healthy 66-year-old without a reason, unless the reason is documentation. That evening, Tessa came by alone. No tape measure, no Brent. Just her. She walked into the kitchen and sat down heavily. You embarrassed me today, she said. By hosting my book club? By acting like everything is fine when it's not. I leaned against the counter. What exactly isn't fine? She exhaled dramatically. Mom, people are starting to notice. Notice what? That you forget things, that you get defensive. I stared at her. I didn't forget anything, I said slowly. You forgot the appointment, she replied. The one I didn't schedule? She hesitated. Only a fraction of a second, but I saw it. I was trying to help, she insisted. If we get ahead of this now, it'll be easier later. Ahead of what? Decline or control? Then she said something that shifted the air entirely. Brent has a friend who's a doctor. He can evaluate you, just to make sure you're still legally sound. Legally sound. The phrasing was surgical. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with clarity so sharp it almost hurt. They weren't just planning to move into my house. They were building a case. I walked to the pantry and took down a jar of apricot preserves I made last summer. I needed something ordinary in my hands, something sweet. I am not seeing any doctor you arrange, I said calmly. Her eyes narrowed. Why are you resisting everything? Because resistance is the only thing standing between me and erasure. I'm not resisting, I replied. I'm declining. She stood up abruptly. You're being stubborn. No, I said quietly. I'm being cautious. She shook her head. You don't even realize how hard you're making this. That sentence lingered. Making what hard? The transition? The transfer? The takeover? After she left, I sat at the kitchen table long after sunset. The house felt different now. Not invaded physically, but strategically. Conversations were happening about me, without me. Narratives were forming. Overwhelmed, forgetful, defensive. If repeated enough, those words could turn into paperwork, and paperwork, once signed, turns into permanence. I stood up and walked into my study. I opened my notebook and added new entries. Book club comment about being overwhelmed. Unauthorized medical appointment scheduled. Mention of doctor friend. Phrase used, legally sound. I underlined that last one twice. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing so soon. I took out my laptop. Not to argue, not to research assisted living, but to look up real estate attorneys outside my immediate area. If my daughter was preparing quietly, so was I. The first attorney I called didn't answer. The second had a receptionist who sounded bored. The third picked up on the second ring. His name was Daniel Hargrove. His voice was steady, unhurried. He didn't interrupt when I explained that my daughter had scheduled a cognitive evaluation without my consent. She did what? He asked quietly. I repeated it. And has any physician examined you? No. Have you signed anything? Absolutely not. A pause. Not awkward. Calculated. Mrs. Keene, he said, before we go any further, do you feel safe in your home? The question caught me off guard. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Yes, I answered after a moment. But I don't feel secure. That distinction matters, he said. You need to understand something. If someone attempts to establish diminished capacity, documentation becomes their weapon. You'll want your own record, independent evaluation, and protection. Protection. The words settled into me like a key turning in a lock. We scheduled a consultation for Thursday, not in my town, 45 minutes away. The next morning, Brent showed up alone. That had never happened before. He knocked once and let himself in before I reached the door. "You should really start locking up more," he said casually. "I do," I replied. He smiled thinly. "Just looking out for you." He walked into the living room without being invited and sat down. Spread his legs wide like he owned the space. "We need to get practical," he began. "The market's good. Interest rates are decent. It would be foolish to wait." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone." I folded my hands in my lap. "I didn't realize my house was a community asset." He chuckled. "Come on, we're family." Family again. Then he leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped. "Tessa's worried," he said. "She thinks you're slipping." I held his gaze. "Is that so?" "You're more forgetful, more reactive. You take things personally." "I take ownership personally," I corrected. He didn't smile this time. "You don't want this to get messy," he said. There it was. Not a threat. Not quite, but close enough. "What would messy look like?" I asked. He hesitated. "Well, if a doctor determines you're not fully capable of managing assets, things can move quickly. Courts tend to prioritize stability for children." Children. My grandchildren had been turned into leverage. "Interesting," I said softly, "because I was under the impression courts prioritize facts." His jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding us." "No," I said evenly. "I'm understanding you perfectly." He stood up abruptly. "We're trying to help before things decline further." Further. Decline implies progression, a condition, a slide. He wanted me to absorb that narrative. Instead, I stood as well. "I have a medical checkup next week," I lied smoothly. "With my own physician." That made him pause. "I didn't know about that," he said. "You don't know about a great many things." The silence stretched. Then he nodded once. "We'll see what the doctor says." And he left. As soon as the door closed, I exhaled slowly. They were accelerating, which meant I had to move faster than I intended. Thursday came. I drove myself to Daniel Hargrove's office in a small neighboring city that smelled faintly of roasted coffee and printer toner. His office was modest. No flashy diplomas, just shelves of thick legal volumes and a framed photo of a golden retriever. He listened, really listened. When I finished explaining everything, the realtor, the appointment, the legally sound comment, he leaned back in his chair. "You're not confused," he said plainly. "No." "You're being maneuvered." "Yes." He nodded once. Then we counter. He outlined options with precision. Revocable trusts, power of attorney restrictions, protective filings. And then he mentioned something else. "You could sell," he said calmly. "On your terms." Quietly. The idea slid into the room like a draft. Sell. Not to them, to someone else. "If you sell before any legal claim of incapacity is even initiated," he continued, "there's nothing to contest. The asset is gone. The leverage disappears." Gone. Leverage disappears. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. "Would that look extreme?" I asked. "Only to people who expected control." The room went quiet. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to anticipation. Not fear, not anger, agency. If they wanted to build a case, I could dismantle the board entirely. I left his office with a folder tucked into my purse and a decision forming like a storm cloud on the horizon. I wasn't going to wait for them to prove I was incapable. I was going to prove I was decisive. And decisive women rarely ask permission. I didn't tell Tessa about the consultation. I didn't argue. I didn't escalate. I did something far more unsettling. I became agreeable. When she called 2 days later and asked if I'd thought more about being practical, I softened my voice. I have, I said. A pause. She hadn't expected that. And? She asked carefully. I understand your concerns, I replied. Maybe we should look at options. Silence. Then relief, almost audible through the phone. That's all I wanted, Mom, she said quickly. Just openness. Openness. Interesting word for someone who had scheduled a cognitive evaluation behind my back. That Sunday, they came over again. Brent carried pastries from a trendy bakery, croissants filled with pistachio cream and something dusted in edible gold flakes, as if sugar could smooth strategy. Tessa hugged me a little too tightly. We can do this the easy way, she said. The easy way. I served tea in my jade teapot, the one my sister sent from Vancouver 20 years ago. I poured slowly, calm hands, measured movements. What does the easy way look like? I asked. Brent jumped in. We list the house under a family transition agreement. You stay here. We gradually take over maintenance and finances. Everyone wins. Everyone wins, except the person signing away ownership. I would need to review anything carefully, I said. With counsel. That word landed. Counsel? Tessa repeated. Yes, independent. Brent leaned back. You don't trust us? Trust is not blind. It is earned. I trust paperwork more than promises, I replied. Tessa's smile tightened, but she nodded. Fine, if it makes you comfortable. Comfortable. They thought I was negotiating terms. I was calculating timing. The following Tuesday, I met Daniel again. We moved quickly, faster than even I expected. He connected me with a discreet agent who specialized in private sales. No public listing, no sign in the yard. Qualified buyers only. The key, Daniel said, is silence. Silence I could manage. Within 48 hours, the agent toured the house while Tessa was at work. I told her I was having a deep clean done. Technically not a lie. The agent walked through with professional detachment, noting hardwood floors, crown molding, the small sunroom off the kitchen. It will sell fast, she said. I nodded. Good. By Thursday, there was an offer. Cash. Quick close. I stood in my study holding the preliminary paperwork, and for the first time since this began, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from magnitude. Selling the house wasn't just a transaction. It was a severing. But then I pictured Brent measuring my hallway. I pictured Tessa calling me not legally sound. And the tremor stopped. That evening, Tessa stopped by unannounced again. She walked in, scanned the room, then frowned. Did you move things? She asked. Yes. Why? I felt like it. She studied me carefully, like she was searching for signs of instability. You seem different, she said. I am. She laughed lightly, but there was tension under it. Mom, we just want clarity. Clarity. Then let me be clear, I said evenly. No one is adding their name to this house. Her expression shifted. That's not what we discussed. We discussed possibilities, I corrected. I'm still considering mine. Her eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. No, I said quietly. I'm preventing one. For a moment, the air felt electric, charged, like the second before a storm cracks open. "You don't understand how serious this is," she said. I held her gaze. "Oh, I understand perfectly." She left without another word. As soon as the door closed, I locked it. Then I walked upstairs and opened the closet in the master bedroom. I took out one suitcase, just one. I placed it on the bed and unzipped it slowly. I wasn't packing yet, but I was measuring. And this time it was my turn. The dinner was her idea. "Let's just sit down and talk like a family," Tessa had said over the phone, her tone carefully neutral. "No pressure, no paperwork." No paperwork. That was almost amusing. She insisted on hosting this time. Brent's idea, I suspect. Neutral ground. Control the environment. When I walked into their house that Friday evening, the table was already set. Linen napkins, polished cutlery, candles burning low. The children were unusually quiet. Lily hugged me, but even she seemed to sense something rehearsed in the air. Brent poured wine before I sat down. "We're glad you came," he said. I smiled politely. I was invited. Dinner began with harmless topics: school updates, soccer practice, a neighbor's new pergola. Tessa kept refilling my glass, too attentive, too measured. Halfway through the meal, Brent cleared his throat. "Let's just put everything on the table," he said. There it was. Tessa reached beside her chair and lifted a slim folder onto the dining table. She slid it across the polished wood toward me. The candles flickered as it moved. "Mom," she said gently, "this is just a draft. Nothing binding." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew. "An agreement," Brent answered. "A transition plan. It protects everyone." "Protects." "Open it," Tessa urged softly. I placed my fingertips on the edge of the folder and opened it slowly. Inside were neatly typed pages: legal language, ownership transfer structure, conditional residency clause, conditional, my right to live in my own home, conditional. I felt the children's eyes flicking between us. They didn't understand the vocabulary, but they understood tension. "You brought this to dinner," I said calmly. "We didn't want it to feel confrontational," Tessa replied. "You don't neutralize confrontation with paperwork." "You said no paperwork," I reminded her. "This isn't pressure," Brent insisted. "It's planning." I turned a page deliberately. There it was, a line referencing capacity affirmation, a clause allowing financial oversight in the event of decline. Decline again. I closed the folder gently. "No," I said. The word landed heavier than I expected. Tessa blinked. "No." "What?" "No to this. No to any version of this." Her composure cracked. "You didn't even consider it." "I considered it before I walked in." Brent leaned forward. "You're being unreasonable." "Am I?" Tessa's voice sharpened. "We are trying to build stability for our children." "And dismantling mine," I replied evenly. Silence swallowed the table. The children stopped eating. Tessa's face flushed. "You're twisting this." "No," I said quietly. "You are accelerating something that does not belong to you." Brent's jaw tightened. "If you refuse to plan responsibly, we may have to pursue other routes." There it was, not implied. Spoken. "Other routes?" I repeated. Tessa swallowed. "If a professional evaluation shows you're not managing things properly, we would be obligated to step in." Obligated. The performance had ended. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. "You scheduled an evaluation without my consent," I said steadily. You involved a realtor without my permission. You drafted a transfer agreement without my agreement. And now you're threatening to question my capacity at my own granddaughter's dinner table. The room felt smaller, tighter. Brent stood up slightly. Lower your voice. I hadn't raised it. I am 66 years old, I continued calmly. I manage my affairs. I pay my taxes. I drive myself. I am not confused. Tessa's eyes glistened, not with guilt, with frustration. You don't see it, she said. You're not thinking clearly. I stood up. I see everything, I replied. The chair legs scraped softly against the floor as I pushed it back. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Brent said. No, I answered, looking directly at him. You are. I picked up my coat. No shouting, no theatrics. Just finality. As I walked toward the door, Tessa's voice followed me. If you don't cooperate, we will have no choice. I paused at the threshold. You already made your choice, I said. Then I left. The mask slipped at dinner. They weren't asking. They were positioning. If you were Martha, would you sign or walk away? Be honest. Write your answer in the comments. The retaliation didn't come in the form of shouting. It came in the form of absence. On Monday morning, I drove to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. The pharmacist frowned at her screen. It shows this prescription was transferred, she said. Transferred where? She typed again. Canceled, actually, at the request of a family contact. My spine straightened. I did not authorize that. She blinked. It says your daughter called. Of course she did. I kept my voice steady. Reinstate it immediately and put a note in the file. No one makes changes without my direct approval. The pharmacist nodded quickly. As I walked back to my car, I felt the pieces aligning. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was procedural. Quiet disruptions designed to create dependence. Later that afternoon, my mail was missing. Not all of it. Just the envelope from my bank. I checked the porch twice. The mailbox latch was closed. When Tessa stopped by that evening, smiling again, like nothing had happened, I asked her directly, "Did you access my mail?" Her expression didn't even flicker. Why would I do that? My prescription was canceled this morning. She blinked, feigning confusion. That must be a mistake. And my bank statement? I haven't seen anything. Brent stepped in from behind her. You're getting suspicious about everything. Suspicious. Yes. Because patterns exist. You're isolating me, I said evenly. Tessa laughed lightly. Mom, that's dramatic. Is it? My book club had been rescheduled without my knowledge. Clara later told me Tessa called to say I wasn't feeling well. Not feeling well. A narrative was forming outside my awareness. I am not declining, I said clearly, and I am not confused. Brent folded his arms. No one said you were. You implied it. Tessa's tone sharpened. You're proving our point right now. There it was again, that circular trap. If I defended myself, I was unstable. If I stayed quiet, I was compliant. I walked past them into the hallway and opened the small cabinet. Empty. The drawer where I kept copies of insurance and tax records had been disturbed. Not completely emptied, but shifted. You've been in here, I said. No, Brent replied too quickly. I turned slowly toward him. Do not lie to me in my own house. Silence stretched. Tessa's jaw tightened. We're trying to prevent you from making reckless decisions. Reckless. You mean independent ones, I corrected. Brent exhaled sharply. You don't understand the legal consequences if you act irrationally. I held his gaze. Try me. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If a doctor documents cognitive instability, we can petition for temporary conservatorship. The word landed like a hammer. Conservatorship. So that was the escalation. You've already spoken to someone, I said. Neither of them answered. Which was answer enough. The air in the hallway felt suffocating, not because I was afraid, but because the strategy had moved from suggestion to execution. You should be grateful we're handling this privately, Tessa said. Grateful. I stared at her. You're building a case against me, I said calmly. Medication interference, appointment scheduling, mail interference, statements to friends. You sound paranoid, she snapped. No, I replied quietly. I sound aware. Brent stepped back first. Not out of retreat, but recalculation. This doesn't have to be ugly, he said. You're right, I answered. It doesn't. Because ugliness requires confrontation, and confrontation requires warning. I gave neither. After they left, I locked every door. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened Daniel's folder again. The offer was still active. Closing could happen in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? I walked upstairs and opened the suitcase fully this time, not measuring, packing, slowly, deliberately. If they were preparing to petition the court, I would make sure there was nothing left to petition for. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, because I was organizing. There's a peculiar clarity that arrives when you realize you're no longer negotiating, you're exiting. I moved through the house quietly, not like someone fleeing, but like someone cataloging a museum before it closes. By morning, half the suitcase was filled. Not with clothes, with essentials, passport, birth certificate, copies of financial records, the small tin of heirloom buttons my mother carried across the ocean in 1954, my late husband's watch, the jade teapot. Nothing bulky, nothing sentimental that could anchor me. At 10, Daniel called. I've reviewed the purchase offer, he said. Clean, cash, fast close. They're flexible on date if needed. How fast? I asked. 21 days, possibly sooner. Sooner. Move it up, I said. A pause. Then, are you certain? Yes. Another pause. Not doubt. Respect. I'll initiate. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen and looked around. Sunlight spilled across the countertops. The rosemary plant by the window needed trimming again. The house felt peaceful. Unaware. That afternoon, Tessa texted. We need to discuss next steps. Brent spoke to someone. Things may move faster than expected. Interesting. So will mine, I thought. She arrived an hour later, uninvited, with that tight expression she wears when she believes she's being patient with someone unreasonable. We've been advised, she began, before she even sat down, that if you continue to resist a cooperative transition, we'll have to consider formal evaluation. Formal? I repeated. Yes, court recognized. I nodded slowly. And what evidence would you present? Her eyes flickered. Behavioral changes, paranoia, hostility, financial mismanagement risk. Hostility? Because I refused to sign. You canceled my prescription, I said evenly. That was a pharmacy error. You scheduled a cognitive test. You needed reassurance. You accessed my documents. Silence. Brent stepped forward from behind her. This is exactly the defensive pattern we're talking about. I felt something settle inside me then. Not anger. Not even hurt. Distance. You've already decided I'm incompetent, I said calmly. You're just looking for paperwork to match the narrative. Tessa's voice rose slightly. We're protecting our children's future. At the expense of mine? She didn't answer, because the answer was yes. Brent folded his arms. If this goes to court, it will be public, stressful, expensive. You don't want that. No, I didn't, which is why I wasn't going to give them the opportunity. I stood up slowly and walked to the sink. I rinsed a teacup that wasn't dirty. The ordinary motion steadied me. Let me ask you something, I said, without turning around. If I sold the house tomorrow, what exactly would you contest? The room went still. Tessa's voice sharpened. Sold it? To who? A buyer. You can't just sell it, she snapped. Why not? Because, she stopped. Because then the asset disappears. Brent recovered first. If you attempt to liquidate under cognitive instability, that sale could be challenged. On what grounds? I asked calmly. You have no diagnosis. Silence again. They were ahead of me in strategy, but not in timing. Tessa's composure cracked slightly. You wouldn't do that to us. To us, as if I was betraying something sacred. You're already doing something to me, I replied quietly. For a moment, the three of us stood in that kitchen where I had once packed her school lunches and iced her birthday cakes. Now it felt like a negotiation room. Brent finally spoke. We're filing preliminary paperwork next week. There it was. A timeline. Good. Because mine was shorter. They left with tension hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. The moment their car disappeared down the road, I picked up my phone. Daniel, I said when he answered, we don't have 3 weeks. How soon can you sign? He asked. Tomorrow. There was a brief silence on the line. Then, I'll prepare everything. I hung up and walked upstairs. The suitcase was no longer symbolic. It was necessary, because by the time they realized what I had done, there would be nothing left to take. I signed at 9:40 in the morning. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and burnt coffee. The buyer, a quiet couple in their early 40s, sat across from me, speaking in low, respectful tones. They didn't know my story. To them, this was a transaction. To me, it was an extraction. Daniel placed each document in front of me one at a time. He didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He simply indicated where to sign. Deed transfer, settlement statement, title confirmation. With every stroke of my pen, something untangled inside my chest. At 10:12 a.m., the house was no longer mine. At 10:14, the funds were wired. At 10:16, leverage evaporated. Would you like a moment? Daniel asked quietly. I shook my head. No, I'd like efficiency. He gave a small nod. We had already arranged temporary housing 2 states away. A modest 1-bedroom apartment in a desert town with more sky than buildings. Quiet. Anonymous. Paid in full for a year in advance. By noon, I was back at the house. Technically, no longer mine, but still empty. The buyers had agreed to allow me 48 hours before possession. Professional courtesy. They were renovating before moving in. I walked through each room slowly, not to mourn, but to inventory memory. The hallway still carried faint traces of cedar. The kitchen tile had a small chip near the stove. The upstairs bedroom window stuck slightly when humidity rose. I touched nothing twice. The suitcase sat by the door now. Full. Zipped. I left behind the couch. Brent called dated. The dining table where Tessa tried to slide papers across wood grain. The hallway, he measured. I kept only what fit into the trunk of my car. At 3:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. Tessa. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. We filed, she said without greeting. Preliminary petition. The court date will be scheduled soon. I see, I replied calmly. You forced this, she added. No, I said. You did. There was silence on the line. You need to come by tonight, she continued. We have to review financial exposure. Financial exposure. That won't be necessary, I said. What do you mean? I mean, I replied evenly, there is no property to evaluate. A pause. What are you talking about? I sold the house this morning. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was impact. You did what? Her voice rose, sharp, fractured. It's no longer an asset, I said. It cannot be transferred. It cannot be contested. You can't just... She stopped herself. You're not legally stable enough to make that decision. I was stable enough to sign. Brent's voice appeared in the background. Put it on speaker. Then louder. This will be challenged. On what grounds? I asked calmly. You have no medical determination, no injunction, no conservatorship order. You filed too late. The air on the other end of the line felt chaotic. You did this to spite us, Tessa accused. No, I replied quietly. I did this to protect myself. You've destroyed our future, she shouted. No, I corrected. I've secured mine. Brent's tone hardened. Where are you? Out? Out where? Exactly? I ended the call, not abruptly, just decisively. At 5 p.m., I walked through the house one last time. I left the keys on the kitchen counter. No note, no explanation. In the hallway, I paused for a brief second, not from doubt, but from awareness. This chapter was closing not with a scream, but with a signature. I locked the door from the outside and placed the key inside the mailbox slot, as instructed. Then I got into my car. 2 states away waited silence, and for the first time in months, it felt like freedom. I crossed the state line just after midnight. There's something strangely intimate about driving alone through darkness with everything you own packed behind you. The highway stretched endless and indifferent, illuminated only by headlights and the occasional green exit sign, promising towns I had never heard of. I didn't cry. I didn't second guess. I drove. By dawn, the landscape had changed. The thick trees gave way to dry hills, then to wide open stretches of desert dotted with low shrubs and stubborn cacti. The sky here felt enormous, almost theatrical in its openness. Nothing crowded it. Nothing leaned in. The apartment complex was modest, beige stucco, a small courtyard with gravel instead of grass. No one knew my name here. No one had memories of my hallway or opinions about my capacity. I signed the lease under Martha E. Keene, not Mom, not homeowner, just Martha. The manager handed me the keys with a polite smile. Welcome, she said. Welcome. The word felt clean. The apartment itself was simple. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, a narrow balcony that overlooked the parking lot, and beyond it, an endless horizon of pale sand and distant mountains. Inside, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and dust. I placed my suitcase on the floor and stood still. Silence. No footsteps overhead. No sudden door openings. No conversations about me happening in the next room. Just quiet. I unpacked deliberately. The jade teapot went on the kitchen shelf. My husband's watch inside the nightstand drawer. The tin of buttons on the dresser. I hung 5 blouses in the closet. 5. That was enough. Around noon, my phone vibrated. I knew who it was before I looked. Tessa. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Where are you? She demanded. No greeting. Safe, I replied. You think this is funny? Her voice was strained, tight with fury and something else. Panic. I don't find it amusing, I said calmly. You blindsided us. The buyers changed the locks. We went to the house this morning. It was no longer my house. You filed your petition too late, I said. You manipulated the timing. No, I corrected. I understood it. Brent's voice came through faintly in the background. Tell her we're contesting. We're contesting the sale, Tessa said sharply. You were under stress. That can invalidate decisions. I walked onto the balcony and looked at the sky. The sun was brutal and bright, unapologetic. Stress does not equal incapacity, I replied. You ran away. No, I said evenly. I relocated. There was a long pause. Where are you staying? She pressed. That's not information you need. We're your family. Family. The word no longer carried weight. You attempted to remove my autonomy, I said quietly. You attempted to cancel my medication. You attempted to schedule medical evaluations without consent. That is not protection. Her breathing grew heavier. You've destroyed trust, she whispered. I considered that. Trust requires good faith. I responded to your strategy, I said. You just didn't anticipate mine. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might hang up. Then her voice shifted, not softer, but colder. You won't see the kids like this. There it was. The final lever. I leaned against the railing, feeling the dry wind against my face. Visitation is not contingent on property ownership, I said calmly. If you attempt to weaponize the children, that will be documented too. You're threatening us now? No, I replied. I'm establishing boundaries. Brent's voice rose again in the background, frustrated, sharp, papers rustling, doors closing. You can't hide forever, Tessa said. I'm not hiding. I looked out at the mountains. I'm beginning. I ended the call before she could respond. For several minutes, I simply stood there, listening to the wind move through dry air. The enormity of what I had done pressed gently against me, not as regret, but as consequence. I had dismantled the board. I had removed the asset. I had exited before they could frame me as incapable. But freedom has a cost. It is solitary. Inside the apartment, the silence returned. Not heavy, just honest. I walked back inside and placed my phone face down on the counter. Then I brewed tea in the jade pot. Not as a ritual of nostalgia, as a declaration. I was not displaced. I was self-directed, and for the first time in months, no one was measuring my hallway. They arrived 4 days later. I didn't tell them where I was staying, which meant they worked for it. When I opened the door that afternoon and saw Tessa standing in the courtyard of my apartment complex, Brent a few steps behind her, I wasn't surprised. I was disappointed. The desert wind lifted her hair slightly. She looked smaller out here. Out of context. Out of control. You really thought we wouldn't find you, she said. I hoped you'd respect the distance, I replied. Brent glanced around the complex, clearly unimpressed. This is where you ran to? This is where I relocated, I corrected calmly. They stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Old habits. Tessa scanned the apartment, the modest couch, the narrow kitchen counter, the single bedroom door. Her expression twisted. You downgraded your entire life just to spite us. No, I said evenly. I simplified it. Brent crossed his arms. You made a legally questionable decision under emotional distress. I leaned against the counter. You filed after the sale. We can argue undue influence, he snapped. From whom? I asked. Silence. Because there was no influencer, no manipulator, just me. Tessa's composure cracked first. "Do you have any idea what you've done to us?" she demanded. "We had plans. We had expectations." "You had assumptions," I corrected. She stepped closer, her voice shaking now, not with sadness, but fury. "You embarrassed us. The buyers told the neighbors everything, that we tried to take your house." I held her gaze. "I didn't tell them anything," I said. Brent's jaw tightened. "You forced this narrative." "No," I replied quietly. "Your behavior did." The room felt small, with the three of us inside it. Heat pressed against the windows. Outside, a car alarm chirped briefly, then stopped. Tessa's eyes moved around the apartment again. "You can't live like this." "I can," I said. She shook her head. "This isn't stability. It's autonomy." Brent pulled a folded document from his pocket and placed it on the small kitchen counter. "We withdrew the petition," he said stiffly. That made me pause. "You what?" "There's no asset left to protect," he replied. "The court clerk said it would be difficult to justify." Difficult, not impossible, but inconvenient. Tessa's shoulders slumped slightly. "You didn't have to go nuclear," she whispered. Nuclear. Interesting word for self-defense. "You scheduled medical evaluations without consent," I reminded her. "You canceled prescriptions. You prepared conservatorship paperwork." "We were scared," she snapped. "Of what?" She hesitated. "Of losing control," I said softly. The words landed harder than any accusation. Brent looked away first. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The desert sun cast harsh light across the tile floor. There was no familiar hallway here. No staircase to measure. Just walls that belonged only to me. Tessa's voice finally dropped lower. "You could have just talked to us." "I did," I said. "You didn't listen." Her eyes filled, not dramatically, but with frustration that had nowhere to go. "You destroyed trust," she repeated. "Trust again." "I protected myself," I replied. "Those are not the same thing." She looked around one last time, as if searching for some hidden sign that I would reverse everything, that I would apologize, that I would offer compromise. I didn't, because compromise requires mutual respect. And respect had been the first thing removed from my own kitchen. Brent cleared his throat. "What now?" "Now." Such a simple word. "Now," I said calmly, "you go home." Tessa stared at me. "You're really choosing this?" she asked. "I'm choosing myself." Silence filled the apartment like a held breath. Then she turned toward the door. Brent followed. At the threshold, she paused, but didn't face me. "You're not the victim in this," she said quietly. I considered that carefully. "I never claimed to be," I replied. They left without slamming the door. Just like that. I stood alone again in the small apartment with the enormous sky outside. My phone remained silent. No petition, no court date, no leverage, only consequence. They came thinking they still had power, but the paperwork was already done. Standing there in that small apartment, what would you feel? Relief or regret? Tell me below. The next morning, I woke before sunrise out of habit, not anxiety. For the first time in months, there was no heaviness in my chest, no anticipation of an argument, no rehearsing of responses before my feet touched the floor. Just quiet. I made coffee and stepped onto the narrow balcony. The desert air was cool at that hour, almost gentle. The mountains in the distance looked like folded paper under the pale sky. My phone had no missed calls. No threats, no demands. That was new. I spent the morning unpacking the last of what I had brought. Not much remained. A framed photo of Tessa at 8 years old in a crooked ballet costume. I hesitated before placing it on the shelf. For a moment, I considered putting it back into the suitcase. Instead, I set it upright. Memory doesn't vanish just because power shifts. Around noon, Daniel called. "They've formally withdrawn the petition," he confirmed. "No pending actions?" "And the sale?" I asked. "Legally solid," he replied. "They would have had no standing. You acted before any capacity motion was granted." Timing. Everything had come down to timing. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't need saving," he replied calmly. "You needed strategy." After we hung up, I walked to the small community bulletin board near the leasing office. Flyers overlapped one another. Yoga classes, book swaps, a notice for a local bookstore hiring part-time help. The bookstore caught my eye. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't lucrative. But it felt peaceful. I called the number listed. By 3 in the afternoon, I was standing inside a narrow shop that smelled of paper and dust. The owner, a woman in her early 70s named Lila, looked at me over her glasses. "Experience?" she asked. "I've lived long enough to recommend good stories," I replied. She smiled. "You available mornings?" "Yes." She nodded once. "Start Monday." Just like that. No evaluation, no documentation, no one questioning my stability. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Tessa. I considered ignoring it. I answered instead. Her voice was different. Not soft, not warm, but not sharp either. "The petition is withdrawn," she said. "I know." Silence. "We overreacted," she added. That word was insufficient, but it was something. "You escalated," I corrected. Another pause. "We thought you were slipping," she admitted. "And if I had been?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer immediately. "Then we would have needed to step in," she said finally. "Step in," I repeated. "Or step over." The silence that followed carried more honesty than any previous argument. "I didn't think you'd go this far," she said. "You didn't think I could," I replied. There was no shouting now, no ultimatums, just distance. "Are you okay?" she asked, almost reluctantly. "Yes." "Where are you working?" she pressed. "That's not relevant," I said gently. She exhaled. "You've changed." "No," I replied. I stopped accommodating. Another silence. "You're still their grandmother," she said finally. "I know." The call ended without resolution. No reconciliation, no dramatic apology. Just acknowledgement. That night, I stood again on the balcony as the sun dissolved into red and gold across the horizon. The desert cooled quickly once darkness settled. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't celebrate. It simply exists. I had a smaller apartment, fewer belongings, no staircase to climb. But I had something I nearly lost: authority over my own life. And that, at 66, is not a downgrade. It is reclamation. Work began on Monday at 9. The bookstore was narrower than it first appeared, shelves rising almost to the ceiling, old wooden ladders on wheels tucked into corners. The sign above the door read, "Second Chapter Books." I liked that. Second chapter. Lila handed me a simple apron and pointed toward the register. "People don't just buy books," she said. "They confess things while holding them." She wasn't wrong. By mid-morning, I had already heard about a divorce, a retirement party, and a grandson who refused to visit his grandmother Because she asked too many questions. I smiled at that last one. Questions are how we stay present, I told the woman gently. She nodded, thoughtful. The rhythm of the store settled into me quickly, alphabetizing, dusting spines, recommending novels based on vague descriptions like something strong, but not depressing. I moved easily, steadily. No one questioned my balance when I climbed the ladder. No one watched for confusion in my eyes. At lunch, I sat in the small back room with a container of lentil stew I'd made the night before. Same recipe as always: thyme and bay leaf. The scent grounded me. Familiar, but no longer tied to a contested kitchen. My phone buzzed only once. A photo. Tessa had sent it without a caption. The grandchildren standing in front of what used to be my house. The new owners had repainted the door. Blue now, not red. I studied the image carefully. There was no message accusing me, no guilt woven into words, just the image. I typed back a single sentence. They look healthy. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then returned. They miss you. I didn't respond right away. Missing someone is not the same as respecting them. That evening, after closing the shop, I walked through the town square. Small, quiet, a diner with flickering neon, a hardware store that smelled of sawdust and oil. People nodded as they passed. No one knew my history. Anonymity is a form of relief. Later in my apartment, I opened the small metal tin of buttons and spread them across the table. Different colors, different eras. My mother kept them, in case something tears, she used to say. It occurred to me that not everything torn needs to be mended. Sometimes you cut the fabric differently. The following Saturday, the children called me directly, not Tessa. Lily's voice came first. Grandma, why did you move so far? I inhaled slowly. Honesty matters, but so does proportion. I wanted a new adventure, I said. Did Mom make you? She asked quietly. Children see more than adults admit. No, I replied gently. Grandma makes her own choices. There was a pause. Then Ethan's voice chimed in. Mom says you're stubborn. I smiled faintly. Sometimes stubborn means strong, I answered. They laughed. The sound carried through the phone like something unbroken. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I did not regret selling the house. I did not regret relocating. But I understood now that consequences echo in subtle ways. Freedom creates space. Space creates distance. And distance reveals truth. 3 weeks into my new life, I received a letter, handwritten, not from Tessa, from Brent. Short. Direct. We miscalculated. That's on us. You moved faster than we anticipated. I hope we can reset at some point. No apology. But acknowledgement. That mattered. I folded the letter once and placed it inside the tin of buttons. Not as forgiveness, as record. That night, I stood again on the balcony, watching the horizon swallow the sun. The sky here turned violent shades of orange and violet before surrendering to dark. I had not been rescued. I had not been exiled. I had acted. At 66, I had refused to be repositioned. And in doing so, I had altered the trajectory of every conversation that would follow. No one would measure my hallway again. No one would schedule my decline. The house was gone, but I remained, and that was enough. It's been 4 months. 4 months since I locked a door that no longer belonged to me and drove toward a sky that didn't ask questions. Life here is not dramatic. It doesn't demand attention. It unfolds quietly. I open the bookstore at 9. I recommend novels to retirees who want something hopeful but not naive. I alphabetize biographies and drink 2 strong coffee from a chipped ceramic mug that says, "Still here." Still here. That phrase means more to me now than it ever did inside a 4-bedroom house. Tessa and I speak occasionally, not often, carefully. There are no more threats, no more references to doctors or petitions. The subject of the house hovers between us like something fragile, acknowledged but not touched. 2 weeks ago, she asked if I would visit for Lily's recital. "I'll think about it," I said. That used to be her line. I did go. I stayed in a hotel. When I drove past what used to be my house, I didn't slow down. The door is still blue. A swing set now stands in the yard, different curtains in the windows. Someone else's life. I felt no surge of regret, no sting, just recognition. After the recital, Tessa and I stood in the parking lot while the children ran ahead. "You look, well," she said. "I am." She nodded. "I didn't expect you to actually leave." "I know." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I thought you'd fold." That was the closest thing to honesty I'd heard from her in months. "I know," I repeated. There was a long silence between us. "I was scared," she admitted. "About money, about stability, about losing control of things." Control. The word finally spoken plainly. "And I was scared," I replied, "of losing myself." She looked at me then, not as a dependent variable, not as a problem to solve, as a person. "I handled it badly," she said. "Yes," I answered, "not cruel, just factual." She nodded once. No argument. That was enough. We are not fully repaired. Trust doesn't rebuild because paperwork is withdrawn. But the hierarchy has shifted. She no longer speaks over me. She no longer schedules things for me. She no longer measures my life in terms of utility. I am not a future asset. I am a present woman. Last week, Brent sent another short message. "You were right to protect yourself." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Tonight, I'm back on my balcony. The desert wind is cool again. The horizon swallows the sun without ceremony. The apartment is small. My life is smaller, but it is entirely mine. At 66, I did not fight in court. I did not scream. I did not beg for understanding. I signed. I packed. I left. And when they tried to define me as declining, unstable, incapable, I proved decisive. Freedom is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a single signature on a quiet morning. Sometimes it looks like driving away without explaining yourself. And sometimes it looks like standing alone under an enormous sky, knowing no one can reposition you again. I am not the victim of this story. I am the author of it. Protecting yourself isn't always gentle. Would you have done the same or tried to fix it differently? Share your thoughts, like, subscribe, and join the conversation. Goodbye.